Thanks for joining us today. I'm so glad everyone could take some time out to be with us. I'm Jennifer Treichler, and I'm here with Melissa Sinanu. And before I get started, I do want to say thank you to the CASE organization for our recent re-endorsement of the ClassWorks platform. We're proud to say that we've been endorsed by the Council of Administrators of Special Education for 14 years now, and we're thrilled to be re-endorsed for another 3 years. So thanks again, CASE. In today's webinar, we'll be discussing progress monitoring as an integral component of compliant IEPs. We're going to talk about what success looks like when adopting compliant progress monitoring in your school or district. This is really a timely topic. Actually, in speaking with CASE over the last couple of weeks, they said that they've gotten a lot of interest from their audience on this topic. So you may have seen it publicized in their recent newsletter. So thanks again, CASE. And let's talk about our agenda today. So we're going to discuss how Andrew F. changed the progress monitoring expectations, defining progress monitoring for IEPs. This is especially important because, as we've learned working with schools across the country, people have different understandings of what compliant progress monitoring is. We'll talk about choosing the right tool and how to successfully adopt and implement those processes, including scheduling time for students to complete it, time for teachers to review the data, and then confidently communicating that data to all stakeholders. We'll talk about what success looks like when all the steps are implemented, and finally, how that success translates to implementing data-based individualization. So let's get started.
So first, how Andrew F. set in motion the new landscape for progress monitoring. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this case, so we won't go into that itself, right? But we will take a few moments to describe how the court's ruling has ultimately led us to new expectations for monitoring student progress on their IEP. It was really a three-step process. First, Andrew F. changed the criteria for IEP goals. The court said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, every child shall have a chance to meet challenging objectives, and an IEP must be ambitious in light of the specific student. So then, with the term ambitious, the court goes on to explain that an IEP's goal should focus on helping the special education student make progress or have involvement in the general education curriculum or state standards. In other words, IEP goals complement success in the general education curriculum. They aren't unrelated skills. Before Andrew, we could write goals that were focused on a few skills, and minimal progress on those skills was acceptable. We didn't worry if goals written in an IEP could be measured in any context beyond the IEP itself. So let's use an analogy and say we have a basketball-related annual goal. It used to be that we could set a goal to improve our dribbling. As long as I could stand still and dribble X number of times in a row, I was making acceptable progress. Now I'm being measured on how I contribute overall in the game. So sure, dribbling is part of it, but my goal measures something much bigger than one isolated skill. So writing an IEP under this new lens dramatically shifts what we define as an annual goal. We do more than show mastery of a specific skill. Our goals today reflect growth on independent measures with a clear definition of success. Now, this change is what ultimately led us to the need for valid and reliable progress monitoring. So in addition to those modifications, next, sharing updates throughout the year about progress became a mandate. Only 4 months after the Andrew F. decision, IDEA was modified to add progress reporting requirements to parents. We report progress toward goals at least as often as each grading period. Both NCII and the Progress Center also updated their guidance on the process for collecting objective data that documents improved academic and/or functional performance. And again, this is broader than showing progress data on a specific skill, which is how we used to do it.
So this is the process of valid and reliable progress monitoring. NCII updated their guide in December 2022, and this quote here is taken from the guide word for word. It's telling us that this 2017 Supreme Court decision highlighted the importance of monitoring students' progress towards appropriately challenging IEP goals, and that the process for setting those goals should be closely tied to valid and reliable progress monitoring. We'll include a link to the guide when we send out the webinar recording. So now we understand how we got here. Let's talk about what constitutes valid, reliable progress monitoring, as mentioned in the guide. The term progress monitoring or monitoring progress can mean a lot of different things, but in its simplest form, it's a way to assess progress toward a goal. Teachers in classrooms are continually monitoring their students' progress while they're teaching. But there's a big distinction between a teacher measuring progress toward a student mastering a specific skill and the valid, reliable progress monitoring that should take place for students receiving Tier 3 supports or special education.
Right, so we divide progress monitoring into two categories: mastery measurement and curriculum-based measures, which today we will call CBMs. CBMs are also sometimes referred to as general outcome measures. So first, mastery measurement. The vast majority of progress monitoring that takes place every day falls into this category. Mastery measurement evaluates a student's understanding of a concept, right? This type of progress takes many forms: Friday assessments, vocabulary tests, questions answered out loud, or even a student's score in their interventions are all progress checks measuring a student's mastery of something specific. This is also, like we said, often how IEPs were written before NBRU, with skill-specific teacher-created mini assessments to accompany them. However, this new expectation requires us to step away from skill-specific progress monitoring for IEPs and instead use CBMs. This is considered formal progress monitoring because it can be established as valid and reliable. A CBM does not measure mastery of one skill and then move on to another. Instead, CBMs measure a student's growth across the entire curriculum. Now, there are two types of CBMs. One is called curriculum sampling, and the other is called performance indicators, but they both serve the same purpose. The difference is just the design of the probe. With curriculum sampling, each weekly probe or test covers the skills taught throughout the year. With a performance indicator, a student's score in one domain is considered an indicator of success for the larger curriculum. For example, growth on word identification fluency each week would reflect overall growth in the reading curriculum. But in both cases, CBMs are designed to monitor student progress over time and identify students who are not responding or making adequate progress. So you can see right away how this is different from mastery measurement. Mastery measurement checks if I know, for example, short vowel A before moving to short vowel I, or, like our analogy, dribbling X number of times. CBMs, on the other hand, provide a big picture of student growth across the entire curriculum. They're not designed to tell you specific skills students have or have not mastered.
So now we've level set our definitions. Let's discuss validity and reliability. NCII's emphasis on valid and reliable progress monitoring is driving a lot of the changes that we see today. Valid and reliable progress monitoring has a much narrower definition and very specific characteristics. You can see some of those here on the screen. CBMs must contain at least 20 parallel forms. So this means there are 20 tests for each indicator or set of skills that measure the exact same content in the exact same format at the exact same level of difficulty each time. And they do that without having the exact same test items. The student completes one of the probes each week. So you can see right away how this type of probe is different from mastery measurement. For example, a specific skill like short vowel I would not have 20 parallel forms and be measured over 9 to 12 weeks. Additionally, the test should be proven valid. A test is valid when its results will be the same as the results on another valid assessment. Your bathroom scale is valid when it produces the same number as your doctor's scale. The test should be proven reliable, and a test is reliable when it's consistently producing the same results when used under the same conditions. So your bathroom scale is reliable when you can step on and off it multiple times and get the same number. It should be curriculum and intervention independent. It's a single measure that shows you how all aspects of the IEP reflect the student's overall growth. And it shows growth over time. This is typically accomplished by plotting weekly results on a graph to show growth.
So let's do a quick medical analogy to really bring home what constitutes valid and reliable progress monitoring. Let's say I set an annual measurable goal for myself to reduce my risk of heart disease. The actions I'm taking to meet this goal include finding a heart-healthy diet, keeping a food diary to make sure I stick with it, planning to exercise 3 times a week, and tracking my exercise with my Apple Watch. So thinking about everything we just discussed, which of the following is the best progress monitoring tool to evaluate my progress weekly? Is it a weekly weigh-in on a scale? Is it a weekly review of a food diary? Is it a weekly review of Apple Watch reporting of activity? Or is it a weekly blood pressure check? I think Jen's going to put an anonymous poll in.
Yep,
I'm going to
I'm seeing that.
That's right. Nope, you guys are doing great. So that's right. It's D, right? So let's talk about why, right? So the scale, it's a valid and reliable measure, probably, right? um, But the number on the scale may or may not be related to the risk of heart disease, right? Maybe I took up smoking as an appetite suppressant and lost weight. So this measure can tell if I'm dropping pounds or not, but it doesn't indicate my risk of heart disease. If my manual measurable goal was to lose weight, the scale would be perfect. My food diary is like diagnostic data that I'm going to use as part of the DBI process. It's important, and I want to continue to review and refine it to make sure I'm making good choices, but it's not a specific indication of how my risk of heart disease might be improving, right? And then my Apple Watch, very similar to the food diary. It's making sure I'm doing what I said I'd do, but it's not really showing how I'm improving. And so that's why blood pressure is that independent measure that indicates whether that combination of things I'm doing is either working or not working. And you guys pretty much nailed it.
Yep. So we've established that for our progress monitoring to be compliant with the latest guidelines, we want to be using a valid and reliable curriculum-based measure. But let's talk about how to select the right tool, those that will lead to successful adoption across the district. In our work with districts, we've noticed 2 specific challenges that educators have had to overcome to move to compliant progress monitoring. The first is not using data from tests or probes that they've created themselves as their progress measure. And the second, not using scores from intervention or specially designed instruction as the valid and reliable measure. NCII addresses these 2 specifically. So in addressing the first one, this quote comes directly from the NCII guidelines. The reason you can't use teacher-developed measures is simply because there's no way to psychometrically validate a teacher-created assessment. Teacher-created tests still play an important part in determining student mastery of skills, but a valid and reliable progress monitoring tool reflects that progress toward the overall IEP goal and needs to be selected separately from a teacher-created test.
And then addressing that second challenge, can we use the scores from interventions themselves? And we get this one a lot, right? And the answer here is no, again, because this is measuring their progress within the intervention, likely specific skills again, instead of a broader measure of using student growth over time, right? Now, we run into this at Classworks because we have both intervention scores and also independent, valid, and reliable progress monitoring. So when we work with the district, part of our PD includes helping teachers understand how to use the progress monitoring data and the instructional data appropriately as part of that DBI process.
So we can say those 2 things over and over. The new guidance says that we shouldn't use teacher-created tests nor intervention scores to track progress on IEPs, but it's important to remember that moving to compliant progress monitoring often requires undoing how IEP monitoring was being done for many years. Some of our liveliest PD sessions are about implementing new progress monitoring processes. Teachers may be attached to how they were doing it. So when you're considering choosing a tool, in addition to making sure that you choose a valid and reliable CBM, consider a tool that doesn't add to teachers' already full plates. Taking the time to think all the way through a teacher's daily actions is so important. For example, some of the guidance says that if you're using fluency for older students, then you should also ask accompanying probing questions when you progress monitor to ensure validity. But think about the time it would take to administer one-to-one probes and be asking questions. There are other options for reading probes that aren't as complicated. Another challenge with tests administered one-on-one is finding a consistent time to administer a weekly probe in the exact same environment at the exact same time each week. A progress check that's done in a quiet room will yield very different results from one done in a noisy hallway. And when you think about scaling, think about feasibility of teachers creating parallel environments each week. In that same vein, another mistake we see is districts establishing widespread processes that ask teachers to manually input or manually graph results. When we work with teachers that have to use Google Sheets to progress monitor, our hearts go out to them.
So instead, when you're selecting a tool, look for progress monitoring tools with the following characteristics. So of course, start with the NCII tools chart. They have a comprehensive list of progress monitoring tools, and they show you how each tool meets their standard for technical rigor. Then, when you're talking to different providers or vendors, confirm the following to make sure you pick the product that's right for you. Ensure the resource is appropriate for weekly progress monitoring. There are some tests on the list that take 30 minutes or more to complete. Those are valid and reliable, but are they practical? Confirm the purpose of the progress monitoring tool you select from the chart. Not all of the listed resources are even intended for weekly progress monitoring. Learn how the tests are administered. Think about the implications of a weekly probe that is administered, like Jennifer said, one-on-one with students and teachers. Perhaps use a resource requiring one-on-one administration as sparingly as possible. Then, for the majority of students, use a tool where they can log onto the computer and complete a probe independently. Understand how the data is graphed. Does the teacher have to enter data? Does the teacher have to create the graph manually? Account for that time in the teacher's day and make sure it won't be overwhelming if the tool doesn't do it for you. Lastly, evaluate the variety of grades, subjects, and even domains of a CBM. Minimizing the number of platforms you're using is very helpful.
So, in buying the right tool, that's just the first step. What else is needed for successful adoption? Successfully implementing any new process happens in phases. And these are the 6 steps or milestones to successful adoption of a progress monitoring tool. So we're going to dive into what each step looks like. We're going to talk about first, understanding the importance of valid and reliable progress monitoring. That's really what we've been talking about most of this session, right? We're going to talk about assigning probes that are aligned to the student's needs, making sure you're picking the right probe to match those goals. Students taking the time each week to complete them consistently. Teachers having the time each week to actually look at the data and take action. And be able to actually confidently communicate that data to all stakeholders. And then finally, all of that culminates really into data-based individualization, using what you know to make needed adaptations to students' SDI or interventions.
So let's dive into what it looks like at each step. So step 1, understand the importance of progress monitoring. Again, this is likely a re-education for most of your staff. Preconceived notions around the term progress monitoring and the old way of measuring IEPs runs deep in many of us. So this step may be one that you visit and revisit as you're rolling this out. So now let's spend a minute talking about how you can help teachers understand the importance of this shift.
That's right. We have to remember that transitioning to assessments that are validated outside of our control can be scary.
It's totally right. So spend time communicating why you're moving to this new measurement. Make sure that the team sees the value of using progress monitoring data to ensure that students are responding to their specially designed instruction. Reassure teachers that the data is expected to reveal slow but consistent growth over time, not immediate mastery. Emphasize this data is there to help make adjustments in a timely manner, but also remind teachers this data is how we ensure compliance with FAPE. Now, depending on your district's culture, you may need to remind the staff that progress monitoring results are in no way tied to teacher evaluation. This is a tool that gives the teacher information about what is or isn't working for their students and a chance to make changes early in the process. Now, if possible, adopt your progress monitoring tool district-wide, especially if you have high mobility in your district. Not only does this help all teachers speak the same language around data, it also ensures that when a student moves from one school to another, you can continue to progress monitor their IEP with the same measure. Confidence in all of these areas makes professional learning much more impactful. And also selecting a tool or tools that save them time, like with automatic graphing and automatic reporting, goes a long way toward getting buy-in. I can tell you from personal experience, when we work with a district that is leaving a competitor and moving to ClassWorks, the teacher buy-in is almost immediate, and this is in large part because of the ease of use compared with many other programs.
And once you have teachers bought into the importance of valid and reliable progress monitoring, it's time to get into the logistics. So step 2 is making sure teachers understand how to assign the correct progress monitoring to students based on their IEP goals. Make sure that you have a simple crosswalk or explanation that connects the area of intervention or the standard of the IEP to the right probe at the student's present level of performance. Remember, you're using general outcome measures, not monitoring one specific skill. So make sure teachers have the resources to match the probe to what they're trying to measure.
And then steps 3 and 4 focus on building time into student and teacher schedules. Step 3, schedule weekly time for students to complete progress monitoring. Step 4, give teachers time to review student data weekly. So this requires planning to ensure students have time in their schedule each week to take their probes. A lot of our districts, because the probes show up in a student's dashboard every Monday, make sure there's a 15-minute window available on Mondays for students to complete their probes. Then additionally, we want to make sure teachers have time in their schedule to analyze the progress monitoring data. The end goal is that we're using this data to make an impact on student progress. To do that, we have to review it consistently. So make sure we give teachers the space and time to look at the data each week. Make sure this time is as valued as the time the students spend actually completing the test. When teachers see you're giving them the time to analyze results, they respond accordingly.
And step 5, confidently communicating the data. Sending home progress reports throughout the year is an important part of the IEP process. This was an important change made by IDEA only 3 months after the Andrew decision. Reports should be sent home at least as often as general education progress reports. Sometimes there's confusion about a progress report being sent home 3 times a year and weekly progress monitoring. We're sharing the data every 9 weeks, but we're collecting that data weekly. And our 9-week report shows all of the weekly data points.
So here's an example of the data you could share with parents. It's graphing the results, right? This data gives parents a very clear picture of their student's growth. Everyone can see the goal that has been set and then how the student is growing toward the goal. Real-time teacher observations throughout the 9-week period. We want to make sure there is a place for a teacher to add observations weekly. Teachers' notes gathered in real time offer great insight to a parent about a student's glows and grows as they happen. Any SDI, any adjustments that were made to the student's specially designed instruction throughout that 9-week period as a result of the progress monitoring. And again, teacher training on the data and reports goes a long way to supporting good collaboration between parents and the school team. It especially gives the teacher confidence about the data being sent home.
And step 6, the final step, this is where you're using your progress monitoring data to make changes to the student's specially designed instructions or intervention when needed. This really pulls all the other steps together and ensures decisions are being made for every student in a timely manner. So when you're successfully implementing all 6 of these steps, you're actually following the model of data-based individualization, or DBI. This is really the end game, or what success looks like, because this means that you're not only consistently progress monitoring using your valid and reliable tool, but you're successfully using the data to make adjustments when needed. So what's DBI? Well, it's really the marriage between the specially designed instruction and the progress monitoring. The DBI model assumes that progress monitoring and SDI are happening in parallel. We're progress monitoring to see early in the process, as quickly as 4 weeks, if the student's responding to the instruction laid out in their IEP. And this is how we ensure that we're providing all of our students with their free appropriate public education, or FAPE. If the data is not showing growth, the team's expected to make adjustments to the student's IEP. When considering which adaptations to make, NCII recommends changing one of the following at a time: the instructional delivery, the content, or the methodology. As adjustments are made, progress monitoring continues, so you know quickly if the adjustment has had an impact. And the process continues. This is really the gold standard for helping students achieve their IEP goals. And we'll include some additional resources about DBI in our email with the recording.
So let's look at two student progress monitoring examples. In the first example, we can see that yes, Ruby is responding to her instruction and she's on track. So this one is easy, right? We have confidence the SDI is working and Ruby will indeed meet her annual measurable goal. We look forward to sending this update home every 9 weeks to celebrate Ruby. Now let's look at Braylon, a student who is not showing growth. It looks like maybe prior to Braylon's 2-week absence, he was probably on track. Now he's struggling to pay attention and stay engaged. So the team is going to meet to review changes we can make to his SDI. Again, the recommendation is to consider modifying instructional delivery, content, or methodology. So just so you know, in ClassWorks, we typically take a few paths. We may decide to have Braylon work directly with a teacher, print out some of his lessons to help build up his capacity and stamina before he returns to the computer. Or if the computer is absolutely Braylon's favorite, we may create mini assignments for him to work on one skill at a time and have conversations with him after each skill is completed instead of working in his integrated learning progression on the intervention. But regardless of the changes we make to his instruction, we're continuing to progress monitor him using the independent progress monitoring tool built into the platform. This way, we see immediately the impact our changes are having on his growth. Once again, it's important to remember if we do not look at progress monitoring data and make adjustments in a timely manner, we put ourselves at risk of not providing the student with their FAPE. That's why weekly probes are such an important part of this process.
So DBI is the ultimate goal, but remember, you want to go slow to go fast. Make a strategic plan for rollout. Perhaps you start with your new referrals the first 9 weeks. During this 9 weeks, take a look at the progress reporting data that you plan to send home for your established IEPs. And at the beginning of the 9 weeks, select about 20% of those students to start monitoring with your new tool. Make sure there's time to reflect throughout. How is parent communication? Was there enough teacher professional learning? Is everyone comfortable with the data? Rinse and repeat until all students are being monitored with your new tool. Within 18 months, you'll all be experts.
So before we recap and take questions, I do want to reiterate our appreciation to CASE for all their advocacy work. As we mentioned earlier, actually, I'm not sure we did mention it, we're friends of CASE, but I know we did mention that we're also endorsed by CASE. And the feedback from the team at CASE has only really helped us get better and better over the years. So we thank them for that too. So for those of you that are not familiar, at ClassWorks, we offer valid and reliable screening and progress monitoring, and also an evidence-based intervention or specially designed instruction. The components were developed and validated independently, but they exist under one login for ease of use. We do adhere to all the best practices outlined in today's webinar, from a product feature set, reporting, and the focus for all professional learning. So if you're interested in seeing if a ClassWorks partnership makes sense for your district, you can reach us at hello@classworks.com. Now, I think Jen's going to give us a quick recap of what we've discussed.
Yep, we went through a lot of information today. So as a reminder, we will be sharing the slides, the recording, and any of the resources that we mentioned throughout in our follow-up email. So today we reviewed the impact of Andrew F. on how we progress monitor today, what constitutes valid and reliable progress monitoring as it relates to measuring growth on IEPs, selecting the right tool, and remember, start with the NCII tools chart, but also think about tools that are going to make your teachers' lives easier. We dove into 6 steps for adopting a compliant tool and briefly touched on success at each of those steps. And each of those steps leads you to the end goal. You know you've successfully adopted progress monitoring when you are successfully implementing DBI.